Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, Red Raider offense starts strong, fades down the stretch. That means there's some good, bad, and ugly to dissect. And could it be a tad too early for an APB on Micah Hudson? Nah, why wait?
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get them casts. And today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. With the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Always appreciate being your first listen. Chris, great to be back with you. And as we begin to hit the downhill slope of the week, we are looking ahead to Washington State. We'll hear from Red Raider head coach Joey McGuire coming up on what he sees in the Cougars, and apparently a lot of similarities in what he sees in the Red Raiders. We'll get to that sound on the way. We'll check in on the offensive line 7-day trial, 14-day free trial. When does the trial period end? I don't know if anybody actually knows, but we'll talk about what we saw at least week one out of the games against Abilene Christian. And I really wanted to start there on that side of the football today with you, Chris, because we spent so much time, justifiably so, I think, kind of bemoaning some of what we saw defensively and wondering what can change in the matter of 7 days or maybe even in the matter of a month on that side of the football. Still a worthwhile talking point, obviously, but I was curious to pick your brain a little bit about what you saw offensively for Texas Tech, because we know that statistically there were some really shiny things that were a result of game one. Josh Kelly had a great night. Jalen Conyers had an impactful night. Baron Morton had an impactful night. Taj Brooks kind of did what you expect Taj Brooks to do. But as the game went on, in kind of a strange fashion, all of a sudden we sort of saw that reservoir dry up a bit as you were unable to sustain drives and finish with touchdowns as opposed to field goals. Now, thankfully, some of those threes did come to fruition when you really had to have them in a 1-point win. But you get one offensive touchdown there in the second half, and there was a little trickeration involved with the bomb to Josh Kelly. They do come back, dig down, and make some plays in the overtime period. But kind of wondering if maybe some of the statistic achievement was, I don't know, a little bit of fool's gold or a little bit of an illusion, given the fact that you really didn't sustain it all that well in the second half. So how would you kind of, in summation, big picture-wise, give us a take on what you saw in week one from the offense? And where do you think they were actually kind of getting tripped up, I guess, in the second half as some of the first half impact sort of faded away?
I think the offensive line is still very much a work in progress. I think that it's similar to last year's group right now. I don't know how much upside it ultimately has. But I don't think it's just going to be awful, terrible, like they can't do anything either. I mean, I think there's the floor is not too low, but the ceiling may not be too high either, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I still think there's some room for improvement, and they're trying to figure out exactly what that looks like. Davion Carter came out of the game. He started at right guard, I believe. He comes out of the game, and he didn't play in the second half. And so Caleb Rogers was at right guard and Ty Buchanan at right tackle, I believe. I do think from what I saw, Caleb Rogers actually played pretty good. That's not always been the case, but Caleb is a leader on this team. I think that after the 4th and 1 on the goal line, that didn't go well, that Taj couldn't. I mean, he's like basically being touched like as soon as he is handed the ball. I think Caleb Rogers came over there and got that group together and kind of yelled at him. I mean, and does that work? I don't know, but that's Caleb's role in this deal. And I think there's not anybody else that could, like, from a player standpoint, that would have that. That's always that's one of the things too, man. That's tricky about the portal. It's like you want what coaches always say, we want player-led programs. Like players need to police the locker room. They need to hold each other accountable. Coaches need to do it too. But as there's so much change in all these programs, that aspect is a bit of a lost art, or there's fewer folks that can fill that role, I guess I would say, than there was previous. I mean, Taj Brooks could certainly speak up, and everybody's going to listen to what he has to say. Barron could, but I mean, like, can Josh Kelly? Can Caleb Douglas? Can Jalen Conyers? I wouldn't think so. Not that they would, but you get what I'm saying. But Caleb Rogers, that's what he had to say. I thought the offense, for the most part, I'd give it a B+ or an A, okay, because they spread the ball around. There was plays made after the catch. You got your 150 on the ground. You were balanced. There weren't, and I wouldn't give them. I think if you want to poke, you say, okay, man, maybe Chris, it's really closer to B+ or B-, right? What about all these pre-snap penalties that they were trying to avoid?
Well, glad you brought that up.
Caleb Rogers, I think I'm right here. I think Caleb Rogers was the only one that didn't have a pre-snap penalty of your offensive lineman. The only one. But no turnovers. But you bogged down a bit. I mean, the 4th and 1 on the goal line, and then you have one of those long kickoff returns, and you have to settle for a field goal instead of getting a touchdown. Now, the other one on the long kickoff return, it's like, hey, man, I think Coach Kitley was like, no, we're not screwing around anymore. So long kickoff return, flea flicker. We'll call the annexation to Puerto Rico play, and the okie doke, and away we go. Wasn't that the name of the play in Little Giants? I think that's right. The annexation to Puerto Rico, yes. Or they were like calling it in on like a tin can with a string on it. That was their version of a headset.
Yeah.
So there's a few things that weren't ideal, weren't perfect. But it's just, as you looked at that game, it's hard to have too many issues with the offense, and we've pointed out some, and then like special teams, I just think so many of your issues were defensively, but offensively, I mean, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the offensive line is not a work in progress. I think it very much is, so much so that I'm not even certain who your starters are on Saturday night.
Well, I would want to make a wild guess, or a hope. I have a hope that it would be, I guess, a combination closer to what we saw in the first half than the second. I mean, just stands to reason, given some of the sustained production we saw earlier versus later. Might be one place to start with some of the changes along the offensive line, but might also need to give some credit, I don't know, to Abilene Christian for adjusting or something. I don't know, as the game went on, but it clearly got harder for Texas Tech. And, from a penalty standpoint, that was one of the things I mentioned in our conversation last week about things you wanted to see beyond just a win in week 1. I talked about wanting to see a clean penalty column. You got anything but a clean penalty column. You're in double digits as far as infractions are concerned. And I think almost half of those came in the fourth quarter. And so I'm thinking about, man, crunch time. Are the knees knocking? We're getting a little shaky in some of the most important moments, because that was when I think you had 5 or 6 in the final quarter of the ball game. So obviously kneecapping yourself in some situations with some of those things happening. But it's difficult whenever you're putting 52 points on the board or doing some of the things you did statistically to really just totally be upset, obviously, with the offense. But some of the rhythm definitely wasn't there as the game went on. Hey, by the way, I was just going to say, as a Tech fan, or Texas Tech fans, we've been in a position before to say 50 points, not enough. Why didn't you score 75? So it's really maybe not all that unusual, at least in the 806.
And I mean, I know we're offensive snobs. Okay. I mean, I admit to, furrowing my brow or turning my nose up at, we only scored 38 points. But I mean, 52 points should be enough to win you a football game these days. Yes. I mean, a 350-yard passer, a 150-yard rusher, 4 different players catching a touchdown pass, 0 turnovers. I mean, it's like if this is more of the reg, man, I mean, because I've seen people that I just am like, we are watching different stuff, or you just have a personal agenda. Somebody tell Kitley we got a 6'9" tight end. What, you don't like the 6'5" guy that he threw it to like 6 times?
Right.
That was doing. I mean, it's like sometimes I'm like, you just can't win. Like even when you do. But I mean, we are trained to kind of break down these games and kind of almost you want to put the blame here or there or talk it out. I can't have too much issue with what we saw on offense. Short of, you can't get to 4th and 1 on the goal line and give it to the best player on your team and you can't get a yard. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And I don't have a issue with Taj in there, but he just had nowhere to go. And I guess you could say, well, call a different play. But I mean, he had 1,500 yards last year. He had a good day Saturday, and it's like you can't move the pile and get a yard against ACU. Yes. So and all the pre-snap penalties. I mean, Joey had touched on this last week. There's some obviouses, but what are some of the things that you want to see? Is obviouses a word? Some obvious things, some obvious things. Yeah, we don't want to turn it over. We want to be explosive, start fast, all those things. Cliche. I want to avoid the pre-snap penalties on offense. I don't want to beat ourselves, and you kind of did it too many times. And those are things that are correctable. You got a lot of guys that are nervous and jittery and whatnot, but that can be cleaned up, and it needs to be. But I just I just don't see where you could just have too many things that you would poke at. Because, I mean, do we not agree the offensive skill looked pretty good and kind of what we thought? I know the defense wasn't, but the offense, especially the skill players, sure were.
I think I said as advertised yesterday, so yeah.
And there's
all of them.
And there's more there. I mean,
Yeah.
At some point, you're going to get the best version of Cam Dickey. At some point, you're going to get the best version of Micah Hudson. At some point, you're going to get the best version of Jacoby Williams, which could be sooner than later, depending on how Taj's arm is and whatnot. At some point, you're going to get John Carlos Miller and Mason Tharp, other than just the one catch late in the game. I mean, and not to mention all the guys that we've already talked about. So long-winded there, but yeah, there you go.
I'm glad you bring up the name Micah Hudson because first, today's episode brought to you by eBay Motors, and eBay has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and keep that ride or die ride on the road or elevate your car's game to the next level of performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, accessories of all kinds to fit your style, whether it's speed, power, or design you're into. eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts to perfectly fit what you need. Just head over to ebay.com/motors, where you'll always find exactly what you're looking for and at no risk because of eBay's guaranteed fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit just right every time or your money back, keeping you burning rubber and not burning cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to keep your ride or die on the road and moving your life forward at ebay.com/motors. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions do apply. I'm glad you bring up the name Micah Hudson because there have been a lot of questions about him. I know we touched on him briefly on yesterday's show or maybe Monday's show. Either way, about all the success that those in front of him were having and how tight the game was, and some of that being what led to not seeing him as often as maybe some wanted or as we anticipated. But I was curious to get your take on sort of, let's just get full freak out fest, which is immediate fan reaction. This guy's phone is going to start ringing if he's hanging on the sideline much longer. He's not here to watch these other cats. It's 4 quarters, and overtime of football, by the way, that we're using as evidence to draw this reaction. But you do talk a lot about, I think this offseason when we're talking about some different position competitions, I think you justifiably so reference often like keeping guys engaged in the portal era, NIL, yada, yada, yada. So I don't know. Is there some justification to include that kind of thing when wondering about Micah Hudson playing time, or do you think that we are like jumping 50 sharks if we're even indulging in that part of the conversation right now?
People in general, and I'm one of them, they generally worry. And it depends on how you want to spend your emotional equity when it comes to worrying. Some worry about finances, some worry about, their relationship with their spouse, some worry about their job, some worry about the kids or whatever. I mean, you spin the wheel on what you want to worry about. don't spend any time or your emotional equity from a currency standpoint on worrying about Micah Hudson right now. Don't. And you can go, I'm just not going to choose to listen to Chris right now. And that's fine. Again, if you choose
also your choice.
Yeah, if you choose to spend your emotional equity on this stuff, go for it. My advice to you would be everything is just fine. He is very much learning. I think he understands that he's learning. He would be the first one to tell you that he made some, growing mistakes and things like that as he went through fall camp. The sport is hard. I would also offer up the data I was sent because I've seen. I've gotten this my way. Well, the freshman at Alabama, the 5-star, he had this many catches, this many yards. Like, what are we doing with this guy on the sideline? I've seen this article was sent to me. Hey, how did all the 5-stars fare over the weekend? And so, but this is what happens when you're ranked this and you've got a little fanfare and your head coach talks about you in these ways. This is just what comes with it. But I would offer up that 5-star receivers, I think in the last 10 years, so listen to what I'm saying to you, 5-star receivers in the last 10 years, I think only 12% of them have more than like 300 or 400 yards on average in their first season of receiving yards.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where, yeah, there's some exceptions. And I'm talking like your CD Lambs. And I saw all these names. I was like, holy cow, I've heard of every one of these dudes. Yeah. Jamar Chase's, CD Lambs. I don't remember if we've even touched on this a ton in this show, but I know I mentioned that to you before briefly. But just remember those. Like, he's fine. I think he'll learn a bit more as each game goes along. He's still got freakish skills, but the flip side is, Cowan, there are really good people. It's almost like, why are we not seeing them? Well, okay, so do you want Coy off the field, Caleb Douglas off the field, or Josh Kelly off the field? They're pretty good too, and that's a positive for Texas Tech football. You're not nobody's worried about, oh, Micah's pissed he's going to leave. That is not a real thing. So he loves it here, and he's very much learning, and he loves the offense that he's in. But he's throwing his like, hey man, I'm trying to, because they're trying to cross train him. They want him to be like Josh Kelly, and it just takes a time. So,
do you think it really speaks to how much that room has changed, given the fact that last year we would talk about him, and you would reference like, dude, he could come in and be one of, if not your best receivers now, and it's not just the change in the room, but maybe also the acclimation period and missing spring, which we probably weren't factoring in at that point in time. But some of the things have changed, obviously, from the way that we viewed him in the dynamic of Tech pass catchers last year versus what has been the reality, again, at least through a week or so.
I think Joey has even hinted that after signing day and everything, like, this guy would have started for us last year. And it is a compliment to what they've done, that he's a rotational guy right now, not a starter. But I'm excited about his future. He's going to be just fine. I expected to see more of like Cam Brown too in the opener, and you got one carry and it didn't look great, and that it's just some young players acclimate quickly and hit the ground running based on fit or whatever it may be. Others kind of ease into this deal. And it just because this is the way it was against ACU, well, let's look up in a month and see where things look. But I anticipate my phone will continue to be hit with Micah Hudson questions every week until he receives he's got like 12 catches for 1,000 yards on Saturday or something.
Just one quick question for clarification. It's not Micah that's hitting you up, right? I just want to make sure.
No, it's people asking Micah Hudson questions.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No,
it's not Micah texting you like, hey, have you seen this article? Look at these other guys.
No, it's definitely not.
Get this out on Locked On Texas Tech.
Yeah, and he does. I think he feels a level of pressure. I think that most kids like that do. But it's just not a thing. And I think that there's a lot of – I think that group's pretty tight. But, I mean, and you still – I mean, do we like Jordan Brown on this podcast?
We do.
Do we like Dre McCray on this podcast?
Yeah, we do.
were they involved?
Other than taking a snap, not much. Although Brown a little bit more involved, I guess, than McCray.
Yeah, and McCray obviously on special teams, but
Yeah.
we think those guys can play, right? I mean, so that's just what this is all a positive here. I don't, nobody should take it as a negative or be like, oh, dude, he's going to leave. He's the Pat Mahomes special brand ambassador. I mean,
oh yeah,
he's there. There's a lot there. People aren't stupid. But this is not a kid coming in here thinking I expect everything. It's y'all's fault if something. This is not who you're dealing with here. And
I got to tell you too, though, when he did hit the field finally, and I saw him from a physical standpoint, I was kind of reminding myself, yeah, the dude is 18 or 19 or whatever it might have been, and just a blink of an eye in a college strength and conditioning program. I know he is lightning in a bottle. But I think from a physical maturity standpoint, you can look at him also and see that he's not exactly like Josh Kelly or not like some of the other guys that have spent more time in a college program. Maybe even someone like Coy Aiken. Now, again, maybe that lightning's just dangerous enough to where he can be out there and look like a Tim Burton character and still slice you up 6 ways from Sunday. I don't know, but that did stick out to me a little bit as well when he got on the field. Before we leave the subject and look ahead to the Cougars and hear from Joey McGuire, I want to mention the word starter one more time, and I just want to go back to the offensive line really quickly. Were you surprised at all to see the actual combination that we did see out there first? Davion Carter does work his way into the starting lineup to begin week one. Then otherwise, it was pretty much a familiar cast of characters, but we talked about these options like depending upon where Rodgers is, then maybe that means Carter is in or is out. Ty Buchanan, obviously a factor in there as well, but were you surprised at all, or do you feel like that was kind of like a slow build throughout fall camp to be in the most likely situation?
Well, we knew it was a very distinct possibility just because you're kind of given a few tea leaves to read. Caleb Rodgers is only going to be on the right side because that's where he feels most comfortable. You get some of that working, and then it's a matter of, okay, would we rather have him at right tackle and Carter at right guard, or do we want him at right guard and Buchanan at right tackle? And I think it's pretty clear that he's just more naturally a tackle. I mean, not that I'm just going to bring it up, but it's like, well, I like the combination that was in the first half, not the second. Well, yeah, you kind of answered it right there, didn't you? I mean, and that may not be, you may not be able to tie any of that directly to that, but yeah. I think that's kind of where they landed. Problem with Davion Carter is this: he's a very technically sound player. He's a very good football player, but what he has working against him is he's about 6'2", 280, which is very small for a power 4 starting offensive lineman. Mm-hmm. He's not as tall as you want, and he's just not quite heavy enough. But he's got great technique and all those things. And then I think that he's had a hard time staying. He missed some time in camp. Then he missed the second half because he got banged up, according to what Joey said on Monday. So, you need because you've got some dudes like that are in the pipeline. I do think they're going to take some kids out of the portal on the offensive line, like come 2 or 3 months from now. I just do. I just don't know how you can't at least supplement. And that's the crazy thing, Cowan, is we're going to judge the offensive line, Davion Carter's addition, Sterling Porter's addition, Vinny Scurry's addition, Maurice Rodriguez's addition. And if you remember back, you are speed dating. All of that is going on like in a 3 to 4 day span. You're having bowl practices. You're multitasking. You've got guys that are rumored to be visiting or guys that are actually there, guys that are like, I need this or I'm taking this visit. And you're just trying to, hey, get ready for Cal out here. But then you are over there on the sideline. You are speed dating. And this is what they came up with. Is it the best? I don't know. Could they have been worse? Sure. But this is kind of what you have to work with. But they're going to have to do this again, at least with a guard and a tackle. But at some point, I do think you're going to have your own homegrown people that are, that are the 6'2", 6'3", or even 6'5", 6'6", that are 300 plus. And, this is what you're recruited and trying to develop right now. I.e. what you just said about Micah Hudson. I mean, what's it going to look like when he's been in the nutrition program
Yeah.
in the weight room? Micah Hudson didn't even go through spring football.
Yeah.
We forget that. So this is still, but yeah, the O line. I mean, I think that if Carter is healthy, I bet that's who starts. If he's not, then I bet it's like it was in the second half last week.
Either way, it seems like the trial and hopefully very minimal error, the experiment will continue on, obviously, into week 2 as we should probably prepare for some continued shuffling. And speaking of week 2, let's begin to turn our attention towards the Cougars of Washington State. First, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel, and America's #1 sportsbook is shaking it up to kick off football season with an offer a football fan can't afford to miss. Right now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. And, of course, you can cancel at any time. Again, from right now through September 22nd, bet $5 and take advantage of a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. A whole lot to get into before the week is done as far as looking ahead to that ball game. We'll hear some thoughts from their head coach. We've also, of course, got to talk about the special one. Mike Leach set to be honored on a Saturday night there in Pullman. But wanted to get a thought from Joey McGuire as to what he sees whenever he looks Washington State's way. And it sounds like there's going to be a lot of similarities there. Here's Coach McGuire.
It's like you're looking in the mirror a lot, I mean, we feel like with what Arbuckle's going to do is a lot what Kitley does, and then I know turning around, they're going to present a lot of 4 down. They're mainly a 4 down team. They close the middle of the field. You're going to get a mixture of cover 3, man free. That the one thing that they've done really, really well, it's one of our best run plays. So it's going to be interesting of, who can do what. Can we run our gap scheme, our counter scheme? They do a really good job of stopping the counter, and so that's going to be a big key of the game. It's one of those deals of do you run more inside zone and outside zone? But I do think we're one of the best teams in the country running, counter, and so we're not going to go away from it. Even people that have played. That play it really well. Iowa State defends it really well, and we still had success on it, so we'll continue that. But it's going to be a good matchup, man, and it helps without a doubt that Clay knows that defense, also knows that offensive line. It helps, that Josh Kelly knows these DBs. But you turn around, I mean, Ben knows Zach Kitley really well. I mean, he's his mentor. I don't know how much they'll talk this week, but they talk constantly, and so it's going to be somewhat of two teams looking in the mirror and who can outplay each other and who can make more plays.
Sounds like Mike Leach is kind of just the tip of the iceberg as far as the crossover between these programs, both past and obviously now present. I don't know who that provides either a disadvantage or maybe an advantage for. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, and maybe one of the shows later in the week, we'll spend a little bit more time on all the different, because there's, I mean, you can get really into the weeds here. There's a lot of, for a program like Texas Tech and Washington State to really have never, they've played, I think this will be the 3rd time they've ever played each other. This is Tech's first trip up there and all that, but they're so far away. But there's a lot of crossover here, a lot, which is stunning considering that you haven't played, and there's a lot of, and Mike Leach is right. He's just the tip of the iceberg. But I mean, we can get into let's see, Colt Garrett, a GA for Washington State, who was a quarterback here a few years ago. I mean, it's just, yeah, the similarities are crazy. Based on what Joey said about Washington State defensively, they are different. I think typically Keith is more of a too high safety look, which basically, that's more of a let's keep everything in front of us type outfit. I think Washington State and Coach Schmedding, I think is how you say it, he's more of a one high safety look. And so you're thinking, okay, what are the differences there? Well, Keith wants to take away the deep stuff. They want to keep everything in front. You had a hard time going really deep the other night against ACU. Now you got them on the flea flicker and you got them on the one shot with Jalen Conyers, but typically everything was kind of underneath and you had to break some tackles and make some plays and you got some running yards because of it. Washington State is going to be an outfit to where they want to put that extra man in the box and say, okay, Baron Morton, have at it. Good luck, but we're not giving you this run game. I don't know if that's how it will be on Saturday night, but based on past history with the two coordinators and things like that of your first two opponents, that's typically how they roll. But that's the game within the game. You try to figure out, are they going to stick with what they've always done? Are they going to tweak it? Are they going to show us something and then get back to? All of those kinds of things. But I think your quarterback will need to play well. I'm guessing that Washington State will try to put the game more in Baron Morton's hands and say, hey, man, you're not letting Taj Brooks run for 150, 200 yards on us tonight. So,
and that's part of what we talked about yesterday, this being, I think, a really huge spot within the overall career as a Tech QB for Baron Morton to answer some questions and meet some challenges, right? So we're all hoping he's going to be doing that. I can't wait to find out. I don't even – walk-off overtime win as a 32-point favorite. What walk-off overtime win as a 32-point favorite? I am the sickest of the sickos and ready to roll again Saturday night. You got to be one to ride with the Red Raiders. And I know you're still out there with us, so thank you for being there. Appreciate your time once again. Chris, you especially, thank you for the time and insights. Enjoyed it as always, man, and we'll see you on the other side.
Absolutely. Sounds good, people. Appreciate you for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.
Get subscribed on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. Thanks, as always, to the everydayers out there mixing it up in the YouTube comments, helping us grow the show. You got to water the tree. Water the tree with a comment and a little discontent this week. It's all right. We're here for all the above. So thanks for doing that, being out there, and we'll see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.